Hey y'all, this is Trans Cookout. It's like swinging on the porch, shucking corn, and shooting the breeze, but make it a podcast. Trans Cookout is a monthly live drop in and listening session hosted by me, Holiday Simmons, the Campaign for Southern Equality's Director of Healing and Resilience. I'll be in conversation with wellness practitioners and trans leaders as we discuss topics relevant to our communities, including wellness strategies and tools for liberation. Come through live each fourth Wednesday of the month from 6:30 to 7:30 Eastern, or listen to the recordings on all podcast streaming platforms. And here is our latest episode. This is the first Trans Cookout, episode 1, Trans Rights and Housing Justice is our topic. I'm Holiday Simmons, the Director of Healing and Resilience. My pronouns are he and him at the Campaign for Southern Equality. And this is part of one of our Healing and Resilience projects. And this is episode 1 of 11 for Trans Cookout. We'll be talking to trans leaders and wellness practitioners every month, all year. I get to have these amazing conversations. And our whole purpose is to offer our communities um, various resilience skills, tools, strategies, as well as deeper conversations, political education conversations, and etc. Our first guest, Kenny Cummins, is actually Campaign for Southern Equality's organizing coach and trainer. Um, they are also South Carolina United for Justice and Equality, connected to that coalition. Kenny is a Black organizer and healer from the South. They have a deep commitment to the South and South Carolina in particular. Kenny is focused on community building and joy cultivation as the center of their life's work. They are proud to call South Carolina Housing Justice Network their political home. They are a graduate of the University of Kentucky with a Bachelor's of Science degree in Family Science with a minor in African American Studies. Kenny is a graduate of Methodist Theological School in Ohio with a Master's in Divinity. Welcome, Kenny.
Hey y'all, it's good to be with you, Holiday.
Great to be with you as well. I'm so glad to have you. I'm so excited to get to know you and to learn a little bit more about housing justice and your work with South Carolina United, SC United, and South Carolina Housing Coalition, and all of this amazing work that you do. So, why don't you just, aside from what I just read, tell me a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, I love to spend time outside. I have been living in the South Carolina area for about 10 years and have an incredible network of friends, family, and just a great life here. And in part that's because of incredible trans folks and incredible folks that are connected to justice. And I consider myself deeply privileged to get to be in a leadership space with the work that I do in housing and in the trans liberation space here in South Carolina. I think people think a lot of things when they think about the South and South Carolina, and housing justice and trans justice are not things that they think of. And it's my joy to be able to say, not only is it something that exists here, but it's something I get to do every day.
Absolutely. I hear that. Sounds like it's a labor of love, and I hear you about the South and South Carolina being sort of uh misunderstood. I think people were highly slept on in the South, and so let's wake them up a little bit. Tell me a little bit about what led you to this work. I hear that you went to Divinity School, you're doing trans liberation work and housing justice. How did you come to this work?
Yeah, so about 15 years ago, I was asking myself some really big questions. I had just finished college and had realized that a lot of things that I thought were true were not true because I got to meet new people, experience new things. And one of the things that resonated for me was things can only change if people say that they can, if people believe that they can. And because of that, I got really excited about a community that I was working in Lexington, Kentucky. and wanted to leverage change. But what I realized were the only folks that were getting things moving were like either politicians or pastors. And so I was like, I am not a politician, but I am the child of a pastor. And so what is the pathway there for me? And so I was a part of a mainline Protestant denomination. Was like, okay, so y'all will let me become a pastor? Like maybe. And in that church or that faith, like there are lots of ways to like move into like ordained ministry. One could be like you're just a lay person, just a regular person that's like, hey, I want to do this, but I want to stay where I live and live in my community and get trained up. And so I thought that's the path that I was going to. I thought they were going to say, yes, Kenny, you can do this. This is great. You can stay right here and continue to live your life and we'll train you up. But they were like, you're young and actually we want you to go to seminary. So I went to seminary, met some incredible folks, like went to school with some incredible folks. And while I was there, it was the start of the Black Lives Matter movement. So like Michael Brown, all of these deaths. And I just was continually frustrated with learning about history, particularly like white men, what they had written about God, and decided to do something different. So I met with organizers, I met with healers. I was having a really hard time in school and was burning out. And some of the folks that like gave me the most gentle care were queer and trans folks who practice Reiki healing. And so those folks were good medicine in that season, and I've continued to think about like how do I get to show up in the ways that they've shown up for me, for others. And so that's kind of been like the groundwork. I think seminary was a space where I got really serious about what it means to community organize and what it means to make spaces and containers for healing.
Wow, that's incredible. That's incredible. And you went to seminary school in Ohio, right? And so then
Yeah.
came back to the South. Hmm. Got you. And so, I think I have a little bit of an idea, but please explain to our audience. We do have some folks joining us live, and I think far more people will be listening to the recording of this. But what exactly is housing justice?
Yeah, it's just this concept or idea that all people should have safe, affordable, and sustainable housing. And so that shows up in lots of different ways. A lot of times when people talk about housing justice, they talk about getting people into owning their own home and like home ownership and the ways in which people have been historically um, pushed out of that reality for lots of different reasons. My orientation into housing justice is around this idea that um, everybody deserves that level of housing, and that the folks that we need to be most concerned about are those that are on the margins, and those folks are people that currently live in rental spaces and will live those in those spaces for the rest of their lives, because ultimately their housing is in the hands of another human being. And now in 2025, it's less about it being in the hands of another human being and actually being in the hands of a corporation. Corporations that often like lobby the federal government, the local governments to have laws and things that like allow them to do the things that they want to do, but not necessarily allow us to have housing that is sustainable. And I know that like for me, if you have a stable place to lay your head, you can show up and do anything you want to do in the world. Like it frees you to show up. And when you don't have that, it creates a level of terror that actually people have to heal from. Like folks that have come out of homelessness, there's a whole arc of like, how do I learn to live on the inside now? So housing justice is all about making sure everyone has access to housing. And like my own personal ethic around that is like prioritizing the voices of tenants, and that housing should be something that we sort out first. It doesn't matter what your life experiences have been, what might be your challenges. Our first priority should be housing people.
Wow. Yes. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. So it's everything from so first so what I'm hearing you saying, it's about the basic human rights. So as humans, as mammals on this planet, we recognize that one of our basic needs and food, clothing, and then shelter. And so shelter, here we go in in our now complex world equals housing, and everyone has a right to that, which includes people who we might think of as houseless. And so people who do housing work with people who are, literally have no structure, maybe living on the street, all the way to people who are renters, and then tenants' rights and the conditions of those properties. And then maybe also, if we continue, it could also mean programs so that tenants at some point are homeowners and have, you know, options so that they can maybe not be tenants forever. So that broad spectrum is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, understood. And the other thing I heard you say is that it's fundamentally about like advocating for humans that are tenants against humans that are owners, but now humans that are just individual owners are now more than ever actually corporations. Is that what I'm hearing you say? Yes. I'll just respond with thank you so much for that, this working definition. I'll respond with it, just my own experience. My first job in Atlanta, so I'm trained as a social worker, and my first job in Atlanta was Grady Hospital, our main public hospital, which is Emory University's teaching hospital. Essentially, public hospital meaning they can't turn anyone away. So it doesn't matter if you don't have insurance. It doesn't matter if you don't even have an identification. They have to treat you. And my title was a psychiatric social worker, and I was working on the psychiatric ward of the hospital, but my actual position was working out on the streets with folks living on the streets and trying to connect them to wraparound services, which included, rehab for addictions, basic physical care, like just a primary care exam, um, mental health care, so seeing a psychiatrist, re-upping any psychotropic medication, family reunification, and of course housing. So the clients could choose to take part in any of those services or zero, or three of the five or zero. And just like you said, Kenny, I see your video just left, but I trust you'll be back. Don't worry. Um, just like you said, you know, uh, by and large, people were most concerned about the housing aspect above and beyond any of those other things because of the intersectional nature of that. If they didn't have somewhere safe to lay their head every night, um, it it's not helpful to reunite with family that they have difficult relationships with that may have landed them in the street in the first place. It's helpful to get some meds, some medications re-upped, but it's difficult to take those on a regular basis if you don't have access to water. So you're absolutely right. And then I just wanted to name, um, you know I think the reason why I thought of what you were talking about as a spectrum all the way into potentially home ownership is because of um, part of the housing crisis maybe 10 years ago was because of predatory lending. So all these working class people who were finally, under this illusion of getting out under the thumbprint of a landlord were actually just getting under the thumbprint, a larger thumbprint of a corporation like Sally Mae, or I think those are Sally Mae's uh, education lender. But yeah, this predatory lending and things like that. So loans they could never possibly pay back with interest rates so high that they were destined to foreclose on their property eventually. So, so yeah, I think that's what you're talking about is bringing to mind to me. Am I missing anything else? Anything else you want to say about that?
No, we're resonating because I think one of the things I always tell people too is that at the center of my work is this idea of imagination. Not just that we could have a place that we own as individuals, but what would it look like for people who live in apartments and have lived there for years to actually be able to take on ownership and govern that space as a community? And also, what does it look like for us to also realize that I have a lot in common as someone who's never owned a piece of property with my parents who have a mortgage. It's because we are both susceptible to folks. I'm susceptible to a landlord, and my parents are susceptible to the bank. So, in a lot of ways, although they have quote unquote ascended into an American dream, they are indeed just bank tenants. Like, there is a lot of class solidarity even amongst folks who have someone, have created some sustainable housing. And so, yeah, I think that there's like this really wide spectrum that goes on around housing and around like my like life work is like this commitment to like what if we got creative and really started thinking through things in a different way. Like there are tenants I'm organizing with right now that are imagining what would it be like to buy their apartment complex from their landlord, like so that some of these issues, those closest to the problem are closest to a solution. And so what does it look like to like reimagine and reframe, and for us to realize that landlords need people, corporations and banks need people to like get caught up in the traditional housing space, but we as people don't. What we need is just housing, and we don't like that's not a rely. We don't have to rely on someone else to do that. There, folks have indigenous folks for years, and our ancestors have had housing that was not given to them by someone else. And so, like, how do we return folks to knowing that there are other ways for us to live and to be and to have the things that we need, even around like non-traditional housing where maybe you live with, this is something that happens in queer and trans spaces. You live with your people and not all of us are related or connected in traditional ways, but we figure out a way so everyone's needs are met in that space. And like I'm hoping to do that like on very micro levels in the household that I live in, but also on deep macro levels in South Carolina with the tenants that I organize with.
Ooh wee, let's keep digging here. Ooh wee. So now we talking about not just um, the spectrum of what uh, humans deserve access to in terms of housing, but also uh, what constitutes tenants and families, expanding that definition, because I think a lot of leases and contracts, uh, there are limits as to like how many folks can live in the space, how many family members, how do you prove that they're family members? And then, at least historically there have been restrictions around, who's considered family even, and then who can legally be under the same roof. And then I also hear you saying something about um, uh, uh, usurping the idea, or getting back to some traditional indigenous ways of even who of the concept of home ownership, or just land ownership versus land stewardship. I know I'm using that word, not you. So please correct me if I'm mischaracterizing. But what are some examples uh, of other ways of holding land and holding property? I know I've heard of land trusts. I'm not exactly sure what those are, but what are some ways besides the typical bank owned, uh, bank owned or individual property owner model?
Yeah, we're in the same lane, Holiday. I'm all about us thinking about things around stewardship and like how do we do this a little bit different. So you brought up a land trust. The land trust is just this idea of like what would it be like if land had like a ridiculous long deed that was only tied to one space. So it's like, what would it be like if the land belonged to the community? So like land trusts often operate so that homes, houses, parks, other things can live within that trust, but then no one can sell or take that away from that particular community. So those are like incredible and beautiful things. And those are actually happening in South Carolina. We have a couple of small land trusts where folks are building affordable housing in these land trust spaces where people like that's housing for like it's way different to think about housing for a year versus like this can be in your family space for 100 years. Like for generations. And that's one space that we think about. There are folks that are buying their buildings and often forming cooperatives. So like that building or land gets to be held by groups of people instead of one person. And so that's also just a like really exciting space. I think there are lots of like, intentional communities that are popping up that are buying land as a group and sorting the land together. So I think that there are lots of ways that we can like think about housing beyond this moment. There are even like really incredible texts being written, like right now, one that just came out called Abolish Rent. So like helping us think through how we can have access to housing and not be stuck in this really archaic and like punitive and oppressive system, because it's wild to me that like you can pay your rent for 50 years in a place and not have any stake, like no permanent stake in it. They can put you out the next month for missing a rent payment. And similarly, within even in ownership spaces, we have families that are losing family land because they have lost the back taxes. And in South Carolina, in particularly, there are heirs property, in which families own swaths of land together. Now, there's some complications there that South Carolina is learning in real time about what happens when folks that move away and are not on the land anymore want to sell pieces of that land, which is something we massage and trying to figure out how do we do that in equitable ways, and are there laws that can be put in place to kind of support that and prevent corporations from breaking up family spaces. But I think that there are lots of ways that we can be thinking about providing housing in a way that is not what we've seen. Because even on the um, houselessness space, there are housing first shelters popping up all over the country where it's not that I have to be clean to get a house. I don't have to be off of an addictive substance to get a house. Folks are being really creative around like, how can I provide you housing and keep the other folks in the house safe? Will there be boundaries about how you live here? Yes. But can we be far more expansive about what it means to truly house people first?
That's a great segue. Thank you for that. For my next question, which is, how does housing justice and all of these things we're talking about impact trans people's lives, and why do trans people care about this issue, or why should trans people care about these issues?
Well, there are a couple of things that come up for me when talking about this, and so y'all bear with me if I get a little emotional because I think like my own experiences with trans is that like my body is my first home, and so people told me a lot about this body that I never thought was true, but had to live in to maintain like a level of safety. And so I think that folks having autonomy over their home and the spaces that they like create for themselves is really important. Um, is really important. So I'll say that first, and to say that like that I see very clearly like the intersection between bodily autonomy and like having being housed safely, justly, affordably, sustainably. Those things are kind of tied together for me inextricably. But the other thing that I think a lot of folks have to realize is that so many trans youth lose their housing for like coming into truth about their first home, like realizing that space. And unfortunately, if we think about the ways in which our current systems are built, yes, there are shelters that exist. Yes, there are programs that exist in vouchers, but those systems are not made for trans people. So identification, mixing like what your face looks like versus what your ID looks like, a really hard conversation to have with someone about advancing housing. Folks that are trans and queer, we do a lot of like self-discovery and second adolescence, particularly if folks come into that space later in life. And because of second adolescence, sometimes we make poor financial decisions, which make it really hard to restart your life, because in the state of South Carolina in particular, but also in other parts of the country, if you get an eviction on your record, that thing stays with you forever. It's not a like, it's not a thing that like can just go away. There are people that can like become bankrupt and that doesn't show up on their regular credit report, and you have to do some digging to find that out. But as a tenant, if I get an eviction and I'm trans, like that sticks with me. And so now I'm like having to navigate with the front desk manager people. This is my government name, but this is the name I prefer to be called. And also, can I talk to you about this thing that happened 3 years ago that's not a true indicator of who I am and how I steward space, but is going to come up when you do a background check. And so I think that it's hard enough navigating the world in a world that often is not built for you, let alone having to rely on those systems. You know, like talking to your social worker, you have a level of expertise around gender that so many social workers do not have, so many government employees do not have, do not care to have. And so making sure folks have access to safe and affordable housing pulls a lot of barriers down for trans folks. Like that becomes a thing that they don't have to worry about or stress about in a world of like so many other stressors and competing realities.
Wow. Yeah, I'm seeing that. I'm seeing that. And that's quite a learning for me. You're telling me that um eviction, if once you're evicted, that kind of just follows you for life. Like there's no of limitations that like 20 years later that would still show up in either a credit report or some sort of background check. Wow. And comparatively what I'm hearing is something like bankruptcy eventually does come off. And bankruptcy is something that people file after they have a certain level of wealth, and but yes, losing that wealth, but it's not, and so you can see the clear, um, class discrimination there. Uh-huh. Wow, I didn't realize that. And so it's everything from who gets to access certain shelters to gender-based shelters to then the ramifications for if you lose uh, such housing, if you get you know you're in arrears or you have evictions on your in your uh, file, it's that much harder to rent, and then of course that much harder to buy eventually. And I just want to I want to admit my own internalized capitalism, I think is what it's happening right now. There's something internalized that's happening with me in my mind throughout this whole conversation. I keep picturing this linear pathway of like worse to better, with home ownership being the end goal. And I know that's totally my own internalized classism. Maybe that's it, more internalized classism than capitalism. But either way, like I just want to admit, just as someone who cares about this, and I am a homeowner, but only for the past two. It's recent, past 2 years, and it's actually taken some healing with my family of origin to be able to get in the position to be a homeowner at almost 50. But either way, like I'm saying that like I care about this, and I'm still like I feel like I feel myself trapped in this particular escalation narrative of like renter, buyer, maybe even eventually being a multi-property owner that has people renting from me. That's even in my background. My parents owned apartment buildings in St. Louis where I grew up. And from what I remember, they were the buildings always needed some work done. My parents were like, every weekend, they were like, we got to go fix the water. We got to go da da da. So, I remember it not being a glamorous experience for them, and it was more glamorous for them than it was their tenants, probably, like because they were the owners. And so that's in my blood. Home ownership, period, is in my blood, and multi-property ownership is in my blood. So even though I'm just now owning my first home at almost 50, I'm admitting some class privilege, and I'm admitting that that privilege has given me some blinders. And I appreciate this conversation because I do want to expand uh, ideas, expand notions, and eventually practice something that's different than like single owner property, single owner properties and bank owned properties, more to like co-ops and like absolutely that's more in line with my values. So thank you so much for laying this path. Um, I want to ask you, um, what are let's vision a little bit. What describe your vision for me? Let's dream and scheme a little bit. Um, if we continue to work for creating a just world that is supportive of trans people and trans youth, and is supporting of fair housing, what would this look like? What would that look like?
Oh yeah, this was like my favorite question. Um, I think like for me, a lot of it looks like being able to have conversations just like this one holiday, where I the home ownership arc is always an arc I have when having conversations with people of Black folks, particularly of all different class realities, because it is something that has been stripped away from us systematically, and it is a normative view of like success too. So it's like I really appreciate that, but I also really appreciate like your willingness to be like, hey, this is a thing that's lingering for me, and I just want to name it and like massage that space and like be open to a new reality. And I think I want to live in a world where when folks are confronted with something different, where they can sit and listen and name the thing that's coming up for them, and for that to be held without a lot of judgment and a lot of vitriol. And I know that's really hard. And I think that there's a balance there. Like I don't ever want to be in a space where people are dehumanizing other humans, but I do think that there are ways in which we have to struggle together. Like I really believe in this like principled struggle. Like what does it mean for me to stick into a space with someone and to struggle with them, like holding their full dignity. And so like some of my greatest visions for like young people and for folks that in the future is that when it's time to talk about housing, they're not doing this like creative visioning reality. There just is housing. Like we're not like, oh, what could it look like? They're just like, yeah, I don't have to worry about that because I could go stay at the co-op. My family stewards this land that we grew up on. I live in deep community in several spaces, and I know that there's a safe place for me to lay my head. Like I really would love to get to that space and to get to a space where there is not a coming out in a traditional way where people are like, where there's just like um ritual that's made where at a certain age or a certain space you get to be like, and this is who I am, and then folks throw a party. Like it's just like, okay, cool, like let's do a thing. Let's like if the name has to change, we change the name. If the ways in which we have related to you have to shift, we do that. But it is ritualized. And it allows the community to like sit and reflect. I think like that's what's coolest part about my life in general is being able to pause and to reflect and to be invited into like ritualized space. Give me 1 second, Holiday.
I'm gonna keep talking while Kenny handles the background noise, and just say that woo, I love that. A queer quinceañera or something. Not to co-op, quinceañeras, but yeah, some sort of just coming of age where a young adult gets to say, okay, yes, I am past my childhood and I'm growing into whatever adult version of adulthood. So honoring a life cycle, but not it necessarily being gendered, or it can be gendered if that child, young adult chooses to be, and then also they get to choose what that becoming is. That's so beautiful. Also, cosign, I'm over here on mute just for our audio quality, but I'm snapping and clapping and tapping to what you're saying, Kenny, about not being able to not having to have this conversation. It does make me wonder. This is where I get curious about other countries and other governments' capacity to provide basic needs in ways that maybe folks don't have to think about. I don't have answers to that. I can't say like this country does it well, but I have heard that there are other places that do it better than us, and I would not be surprised. But yeah, it looks like you're back now, so I'll let you continue. But yeah, not having to have this convo, and yeah, beautiful coming of age. That's just an arrival, not necessarily a gender-based arrival. Yes. Anything else
I think,
in the
yeah,
dream
because
work?
the thing I also want to say just about the ritual piece is like I grew up in a Christian denomination, so like I regularly was a part of like baptisms, and baptisms were like this communal event where we said language like we were gonna like have this little human's back in real ways, and like we professed really strong things like I'm gonna resist evil in all its forms, and I like think that those are the spaces where like I had the most reflection points like in my life. It was like, oh, we're saying these things. Do I believe them? And so like, I just want for, for us to have like actual rituals that matter and that like can hold us in the midst of like really hard things. Cause like I think the moment that we're living in is really hard. And the only way like that we get to hold each other is like when we create those containers to do so that are like intentional and make space for a reflection.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can feel that tenderness there. I can tell how deeply embodied this work is for you. And yeah, on that note, how have you been taking care of yourself these days? What have been some of your resilience practices and strategies?
Yeah, I just started working with an incredible Black queer therapist who is reading me the filth, and I'm grateful for it. Like I was like, it's a very fresh relationship, but they are thorough and and using language. I think sometimes that therapy can become a space where you feel like someone is purveying things into you, and not necessarily that it's a space of partnership and navigation. And I'm really grateful for the ways in which that human is showing up for me, and I'm creating a container for myself for that weekly or bi-weekly so that I can release and like honor what I need to be doing for myself in this season. Because as someone whose primary work is community organizing and healing support, there are weeks where it's all about a lot of other humans, or a day that's all about a lot of other humans. Even in this call, people know where I am, and have some housing issues, and had showed up even in the midst of me having this conversation with you, Holiday. And I had to be like, you know what? Love you, want to show up for you. And this moment right now is for me and for others folks that I like committed to in this moment. And we can talk about the things that you need at another moment, but how do you do that? So like trying to hold really strong boundaries,
Come on,
creating,
boundaries.
listen, they are a gift. And when we don't like hold those things, like it actually changes the integrity of actually the relationship that we hold with people and spaces. Like we're not having real relationships if we can't be really honest about the things that we want and the things that we need. And then the other thing I'll say is like I'm trying to find these like really tiny pockets of joy and pleasure every day, whether that's like um, candy that I have in my pocket so that I can pause in the midst of like deep and hard meetings to be like I'm gonna pop this chocolate and like feel it on my tongue, enjoy that sensation. Or if it's like I'm going to make myself a really layered and beautiful mocktail drink where I'm like adding different things that I know that I love and are good for my body. And that's like a space that I feel really committed to. And then also, Holiday, you've already seen this, and some of y'all might have already seen this big monstrosity of a water bottle that I'm using, not because I wanted to. Let me be very clear. A friend gave it to me because they were like, you have this big commitment to pouring into others, and I need you to commit to pouring into yourself. And so this is the space I want you to be. So I'm like, I carry it every day, like as a reminder of the love that like people are pouring into me, and that how intentional I have to be about pouring that into myself.
Wow, that's brilliant. And blessed friends that hold us accountable. That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing those. Who or where are you finding hope and inspiration these days? There is so much going on, and much of it is not actually new. You know, for so many of our lives,
Ooh,
a new page was not turned January, what was it, 20th? You know, maybe it was just like another
another
index,
layer.
another
Yep.
chapter to the same book. But yeah, so where are you finding? I appreciate hearing about those resilient strategies you've been engaging. Um,
Yeah.
that's brilliant, by the way. Just a little chocolate, just the little things, right? Just a
Yeah.
little bit. And but also, who and what are you finding inspiration and hope in?
Yeah, like I'm spending lots of time with children and youth and young people who invite me into whimsy, into play, into silliness. So those are folks that are connected to my family. Those are folks that are connected to the folks that I organize with. Shout out to a little human who turns 5 tomorrow, whose father I organize with, and I'm very excited to celebrate this child in big loving ways. And so that's like really shaping and like helping me be grounded. And then also my connection with elders. So I'm reading texts of those who have transitioned a lot. Like I'm in my Howard Thurman bag right now, reading a lot of the things that he wrote, but also like spending time in great conversation with elders. And I'm in this really sweet chapter of my life where like I claimed a name for myself at the beginning of this month as Kenny. And I have all these black elders in my life that don't actually understand certain gender dynamics, but they love my name and they call me by name. And that relationship of like navigating of them learning what it means to honor the full embodiment of who I am, but me learning like their commitments and their discipline and where that comes from. Those are like the things that are like really anchoring me, like being, I like things, there's like a quote that talks about like earning the respect of the next generation and like avenging the suffering of your ancestors. And like I am neatly in that middle pocket of like reaching forward and back. And those are the things that are grounding me. So any other things folks want to share with me about those spaces, whether that's art and fun things that little new generation people are doing or things that have come before me, are the things that are holding me in this moment.
Ah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. The torch, carrying that torch, you know, reaching forward and holding for those who've been carrying it while simultaneously reaching back for those who come in forward. Sankofa, if you will. You know, you headed, you back this way and you next that way for those of us on video. Um, Sweet. That's brilliant. And I think that quote is our a local Atlanta organizer, Mary Hook's quote. I believe it's the mandate, and the mandate is for Black people to avenge the suffering of our ancestors. To uh, you said the next to
I think
to
it's earn
make
the respect,
to earn the
to
respect of future generations and to be transformed in the work.
formed in the service of the work.
To
Yes.
be transformed in the service of the work. Shout out to Mary Hooks of the Movement for Black Lives and Stop Cop City um, organizing. Excellent. You're so ingenious, just brilliant, Kenny. I'm so grateful to share space with you. Let's turn over to some of our questions that came in advance, and then we'll see what's up with the chat. Let's see. So we have a question here about let's see. Um, how are other providers managing personal wellness while trying to continue to fully show up for our trans siblings? So I'm gonna actually expand that question a little bit and just reiterate for our audience the various leadership roles you hold. So you are a not a chaplain, but you you have a master's in divinity, so you're like kind of a person of the cloth. You be holding like pastoral care space, right, of some sort. You also are doing trans rights work through South Carolina United, which is a coalition of multiple organizations in South Carolina, and which is both going into the legislative offices as well as supporting people on the ground, if I'm not mistaken. And then you're also the executive director of South Carolina Housing Coalition.
Yeah, you
Is that
got it. Housing Justice Network. Yep. So
Housing Justice
yeah.
Network? So the network,
Yep.
which is doing direct service for tenants' rights, etc. So you are definitely a in some leadership roles and some healing roles and some practitioner roles, as we call it. So the question is, you know, you've given us some of your resilient strategies, but I guess to expand it beyond just your own life, if you have any thoughts about how other folks in leadership positions can take care of themselves while also taking care of other folks.
Yeah, I think the first thing I'll say is some folks got to call off work, and call out and clear a calendar. And I'm guilty of this myself. Like today was a stacked day, but I knew it would be. We have a really heavy fight next week in South Carolina at the legislature, and so I had to do the things that I have to do, but we have to like be able to like pour and rest and reset. And so that's the thing that I'm like continually challenging my peers. I'm in this week is my week of like texting all the other trans leaders I know in South Carolina, being like, I'm thinking about you, I love you, blah blah blah. And then next week I'm gonna hit them with the, I'm taking this day off. What's your next day off? because there has to be a level of accountability and love and support around that, because it's really easy to think that, like, I think some of us who get to a certain positionality think like we survived, and so we have a little bit of a survivor's guilt and don't prioritize what we need to maintain. So that's one piece, is like, can you clear the calendar? Can you take a day off? And then the other thing is, like, I think like we need to be in circle with one another. So what does that mean to like break bread? What does that mean to like troubleshoot? I think it's really wild sometimes that like we will sit in silo around an issue or a problem and not just call up fam and friends and other people who do the similar work to do that. And like, one of the coolest things I know about some clergy that are in my life is like, some of them have a regular circle. Like, they gonna see each other every other week. They gonna talk about the things that they kind of plan to preach on, and they gonna talk about whatever the biggest thorn or joy is in their work. And that, those kind of conversations are conversations you can't have with necessarily the people that you're serving, but or like are leading for, but they are conversations you can have with people who are in very similar positionality. And I know that that's not a, that all of us don't have that access point. Like, I'm really privileged in South Carolina to be like, oh yeah, I got the cell phone numbers of a lot of trans leaders and a lot of folks that are doing this work, and feel grateful for it. And a lot of people can't say that. But we have to find those circles, even if it means coming to like resiliency spaces that are hosted by Campaign for Southern Equality and connecting with folks in the chat, or looking for the support groups online or things of that nature. We have to find spaces to be in deep and intentional community with folks.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely. So, learning to take breaks and set boundaries. Woo, lifelong lesson. Mentorship and kinship. Yes, indeed. That's right. We got a question here around several people asked like how I want to be involved. I want to advocate. I want to get involved in advocacy. I do think that, in spite of the fact that this latest admin federal administration, has had various impacts on various people. And some of us, many people were already suffering and struggling before this. Um, for a lot of people, it actually is a wake up call, and it is a call to action. So, what are your thoughts about how folks can either up their activism or advocacy, or start it if they never have?
Yes, I love this question. This is like my biggest moment right now, like the thing I'm having conversations with people a lot about. And one thing I want to say is, like, again, a really quick history lesson. There's one thing that people often pull to in history that they're like, oh, I know this thing. Most people know about the Montgomery bus boycott and are excited about that story arc. And the thing what I want to tell people is, number one, the person who sat down on the bus, like, that was planned and staged before it came to be. And two, that thing lasted for 381 days. That happened because organizations got together. Organizations of people, but organizations nonetheless. So if you're in this moment where you're like, I feel fired up, I am excited, I want to do something, the space that I'm inviting you to do is, number one, realize it's a long haul reality. Number two, realize that not all of us are going to get to be a revolutionary and like be named in the written record. And then three, that we need to get information. So finding a home to do that work in is really important. And I promise you, that a lot of things that you want to do already exist in the world. There are already people doing the things that you want to do, even if they're not in your neck of the woods. There are ways that we can learn and lean into and get into formation under those folks to really, to make some people hurt, like to change and shake up some things. But I would invite folks to like moving into organization and being in reflection about that this is a long haul fight, and that there is not a lot, there's not glory in the ways that we think about glory in this struggle for freedom.
Absolutely, absolutely. Pacing, recognizing that it's a marathon, not a race. Um, Absolutely. That's sound advice. We had in the chat here, we Ivy Hill sent some love, and as well we have Wula is saying, I'm learning so much from this program. I always wondered why folks drag bell hooks for being a landlord. Interesting. Yes. Yeah, I hadn't heard that critique of her, but if we had more time, I'd love to explore like, if it what's the is there a sweet spot? Is there a sweet spot? Is it possible to be literally, technically, legally a landlord, own a property owner where people rent from you, but not necessarily be engaged in exploitation, extraction, and things like that? I hope and believe that to be true. Um, but I will just leave that up for our audience to explore. Is that possible? um and so let's see, just we got a couple more questions here in the chat. Someone wanted to know how to become a guest on this show, so I am going to drop the link in the chat. uh if you are a trans leader or practitioner or want to be a guest on the show, you can fill out that form. We will have 10 more guests for the rest of the year. We also have a question here around um, some of the new executive orders. There's a question around identity markers and changing gender markers. And the person is from a particular state, but they're born in another state. So the way I'm going to answer that question is um, to say that there is no one answer. The so Gender markers are, of course, based by the state that you live in. Each state, and even amongst that, even like the city and the county you were born in. So to find your medical records, your birth certificate, you'll need to go to vital records for where you were born. That will be if you can change your gender marker. That will be it depends on your state. Each state requires different things. There are some states that do not allow that change, no matter what. Um, that's one identity marker. Of course, there's also passport and driver's license. Right now, as far as I know, you can still change your gender marker on passports the easiest. Hurry up, we don't know what's going to change. There are lots of organizations, or some organizations, doing passport clinics, and so that's our general advice about that. Kenny, you want to add anything to that question?
No, you covered it. Like we got to do our own little research in this space, and if you're something that you're desiring to do, let's do that research sooner than later, because this climate is ever changing.
Absolutely. And then I'm going to drop another resource. This is our Keep Your Head Up digital wellness kit. I want to acknowledge that we all have a host of privileges and oppressions, but one of the identity groups that has the least amount of decision making and power is children and youth, and that's across the board. And you know that's for a number of reasons. So this question is specifically for our young folks. Um, what words of encouragement do you have for trans youth in this moment, as a trans adult, as a healer, as a Southerner, and as a powerful person? What would you say to our trans babies in this moment?
I would tell y'all that you're loved and admired, and held, in this moment, whether those people that love, honor, and admire you are in your life or not, and you can see them. There's not a day that I don't get up in the embodiment that I hold and not think about people that are younger than me, that are coming into identity and claiming things for themselves. And that is a practice for me, a deep gratitude for me. I honor them. And when I go and I show up into spaces, like I do this work because of them. So that's number one. I want you to know, no matter if it seems like no one in your immediate family or circle cares, there are people and trans adults who live and know and think about you and live in a lot of ways for you. So that's number one. Number two, I want you to know that we have always existed. Trans people have always existed. Okay? Like in every time, in every space, in every place have existed. And that is a thing that like you can hold as medicine and truth no matter where you go and no matter what you have, no other space you're in. And then the last thing I'll say is that like you get to grow up should you choose. Like you get to grow up and there are adults and organizations and places that will help support you if you keep choosing to show up and to grow up. So I know that there's a lot of vitriol in the world right now. And I know that so many of us are not privileged to have friends and family who understand and who can support and walk with us, but you get to grow up. Should you choose it? And a lot of us would want to choose that for you. So that's my like message to trans youth, trans babies, trans adults who honestly are also still coming to terms with who they are and are feeling the weight of this current climate. We've always existed and we always will.
Ashe, amen, and aho. Thank you so much, Kenny Cummings, for joining me. Thank you for being in conversation with us. This is truly, truly a gift. I hold your wisdom and your experiences close to my heart. I'm so grateful other people get to experience you and keep on shining. I want to also thank our director of communications, Adam Pulaski, our show producer, Cody Nelson, Andy Reeder for the graphics, Cecil Robinson for additional comms work, all of our folks for joining us live, and everyone who will be listening to this at some point. And this will be archived. Here is one of the many memories that we get to create in this world that's trying to erase us. So we won't be erased. We are here, and we hope you join us again the fourth Wednesday of every month, next month, March 26th, 6:30 p.m. Eastern for the live version. And look out for all of the audio recordings on all of your streaming platforms to come. Take care, Kenny, and thanks everyone. We'll see you later.